I am telling this story 1 year after everything finally collapsed because distance is the only thing that lets me breathe enough to speak clearly about it now. My name is Richard Holloway. I am 63 years old and I live in San Diego, California. A city where the ocean always looks calm even when things underneath are anything but. I have lived here almost my entire life. I raised my daughter here after my wife passed away and I thought I understood what it meant to protect someone you love. I was wrong about that. I thought protection meant guidance, advice, and sometimes stepping back. I did not understand that sometimes protection means silence, preparation, and patience so deep it hurts every single day. My daughter is named Emily. She is 30 years old now. Intelligent, kind, open-hearted in a way that makes the world dangerous for her. She has always believed people mean what they say. She believes love fixes things. She believes honesty is enough. I raised her that way because I wanted her to be good in a world that often is not. I did not realize how easily that goodness could be used against her. 3 years before everything ended, Emily married a man named Daniel Cross. I remember the first time I met him. It was a Sunday evening. Emily brought him to my house for dinner. I was standing in the kitchen when I heard her laugh at the front door. That laugh used to mean safety to me. That night it felt like a warning. Daniel was charming. That is the first thing people notice about men like him. Tall, confident, well-dressed. He smiled easily and spoke with just enough warmth to seem sincere. He shook my hand firmly and looked me in the eye for just a moment too long. I noticed that immediately. Some people look at you to connect. Others look at you to measure. Daniel was measuring. Dinner went smoothly on the surface. He complimented the food before tasting it. He asked about the neighborhood, the house, the view. He asked how long I had lived there. He asked how long I had been alone since my wife passed. He asked how Emily grew up here. Each question seemed harmless. Taken together they formed a map. I had spent decades reading people and I felt something tighten in my chest as I watched him build that map quietly. Emily was glowing that night. She watched Daniel the way people watch something they are afraid to lose. I could see how deeply she wanted him to be accepted. So I smiled. I nodded. I played my role. Inside I was already alert. That night after they left I sat alone in my study and looked at a photograph of my wife Laura. She had always trusted her instincts more than anything else. She used to tell me that charm without kindness is a warning sign, not a gift. Sitting there I felt the same instinct she used to describe. Something was wrong but I could not prove it. And that mattered. For 12 years after Laura died I had been renting a storage unit downtown near the old harbor. No one ever questioned it directly but everyone assumed it was full of clutter. Old furniture, boxes of things I could not throw away. I let them believe that because the truth was not something I was ready to explain. That unit was not storage. It was protection. Inside that unit were documents Laura and I prepared together before she passed. A family trust. Insurance policies. Legal safeguards designed to make sure Emily would always be safe no matter who entered her life. Laura had insisted on it. She had seen too many women lose everything by trusting the wrong person. She told me once that love without protection is just hope and hope is not enough. Emily did not know about any of it. That was intentional. I did not want her to feel managed or controlled. I wanted her to live freely. I just wanted a safety net she never had to see unless she needed it. When Emily told me she was marrying Daniel I felt that instinct flare again. But instincts without evidence sound like paranoia. I did not want to be that father. The one who pushes his daughter toward the very man he distrusts by voicing concern too early. So I stayed quiet. The wedding was beautiful. Everyone said so. The venue, the ocean breeze, the smiles and the photos. I stood there watching Emily walk toward Daniel and I felt something heavy settle in my stomach. Daniel looked at her like something he had won, not someone he was choosing every day. It was subtle. No one else noticed. But I did. After the wedding, Daniel began visiting more often. He was polite. Helpful. Always offering to carry things, fix things, handle things. He liked being seen as capable. But I noticed what he paid attention to. He noticed the car I drove. He noticed the renovations I had done to the house. He noticed what Emily said about money, even casually. He asked questions that seemed curious but always pointed in the same direction. Within 6 months Emily started changing. Slowly at first. She stopped calling as often. When she did, her voice sounded distracted, like someone else was in the room even when she said she was alone. Daniel always had opinions about how she spent her time. He framed them as concern. "He just wants what is best for us, Dad," she told me once. "He worries about me." That sentence stayed with me. People who worry do not usually restrict. They do not isolate. They do not monitor. But I said nothing. I watched. I began keeping notes. Not because I wanted to build a case, but because I needed to know if I was imagining things. I wrote dates, times, small observations. Daniel steering conversations. Daniel correcting Emily mid-sentence. Daniel making jokes at her expense, then smiling when she looked uncomfortable. Each note felt insignificant alone. Together they began forming a pattern. A year into their marriage, Emily called me late one night. Her voice was tight, controlled. She asked why I had never told her about my finances. She said Daniel thought it was strange that she did not know what I planned to leave her. That question was not hers. It carried someone else inside it. I answered carefully. I told her I had things set up to protect her and that she never needed to worry about it. She was quiet for a moment, then said Daniel thought secrecy meant distrust. That was the first time I heard my daughter repeat his words instead of her own. Soon after that she began questioning my relationships. She asked why I was still close with Michael Bennett, my oldest friend. She said Daniel thought Michael was too involved. Too opinionated. Too close. When I told her that was not true, she asked how I could be sure. That question hurt more than anything else. Because it told me Daniel had begun separating her from people who knew her before him. This is how it happens. Not all at once. Not loudly. Slowly, carefully. Like tightening a knot, one pull at a time. I did not confront Daniel. I did not warn Emily. Instead I documented. I recorded dates when she canceled plans suddenly. When she stopped seeing friends. When she apologized for things she did not need to apologize for. I wrote down every moment that felt off. Because patterns are hard to deny when they are written down. 2 years in I saw the first bruise. On her arm. She said she bumped into a door. She said it casually, like she had practiced the sentence. My heart pounded but my face stayed calm. I noted the date when she left. I noted the placement of the bruise. I noted her tone. The bruises became more frequent. Always explained. Always minimized. And always followed by her defending Daniel. He is under a lot of stress. He does not mean it. I make him upset sometimes. Those sentences are weapons. They turn inward. By the 3rd year I had filled hundreds of pages. I knew what I was watching. Daniel was not just controlling. He was strategic. He was isolating Emily financially, emotionally, socially. And he was beginning to escalate. Then Michael called me. His voice was different that day. Tighter. Afraid. He told me he had overheard Daniel talking about me. About how things would be easier if I were gone. About insurance. About inheritance. About how Emily deserved better support. I believed him immediately. Because everything I had documented led to that moment. The isolation, the control, the escalation. It was no longer just about Emily. It was about removing me. Every sound felt louder than usual. The refrigerator clicking on. The distant sound of traffic from the freeway. I kept thinking about Daniel's voice as Michael described it, calm, almost casual, as he talked about my life like it was an obstacle instead of a person. That was when I stopped pretending this was something that might resolve itself. The next morning I went back to the storage unit. It was early and the place was almost empty. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, letting the familiar smell of cardboard and metal settle around me. That unit had been my insurance for years, but now it felt like a command center. I pulled out the new leather journal and began organizing everything I had already written. Dates. Timelines. Patterns. I added a new section labeled escalation. I wrote down what Michael had told me word for word, as close as I could remember. I wrote how Daniel had begun asking about insurance policies. I wrote about Emily's bruises. I wrote about the way her voice changed when she talked about him. When I finished that first long entry, I sat there staring at the page, realizing something important. This was no longer about whether I was overreacting. This was about survival. From that point on, I treated everything differently. I varied my routines. I stopped taking the same walks at the same times. I paid attention to cars behind me. I did not confront Daniel. I did not warn Emily. Because I knew the moment I did, Daniel would accelerate. Men like him do not back away when challenged. They push harder. Over the next few weeks, Daniel became bolder. He stopped pretending to respect boundaries. He called me directly for the first time, asking about my plans, my property, my future. His tone was friendly, but his words were sharp. He accused me of withholding things from Emily. He said a father should trust his son-in-law. I listened. I said very little. Everything he said went into the journal later that night. Emily grew quieter. When she visited, she looked over her shoulder as if expecting Daniel to appear behind her even when he was not there. She flinched when my phone rang. She apologized constantly. For staying too long. For eating too much. For laughing at the wrong moment. Watching that broke something inside me, but I stayed patient because patience was the only weapon I had left. One afternoon, Michael stopped by unexpectedly. He looked shaken. He told me Daniel had confronted him in a parking lot, accusing him of trying to interfere in Emily's marriage. Daniel told him to stay away or things would get complicated. Michael had known me for over 30 years. He was not dramatic. He was scared. That was when I realized Daniel was expanding his perimeter. He was not just isolating Emily anymore. He was threatening anyone who might support her. That is not insecurity. That is strategy. I began copying documents. I scanned pages of the journal. I photographed bruises when Emily would let me. I saved messages she sent apologizing for things that were not her fault. I built redundancy because I understood something fundamental. If something happened to me, this information needed to survive. Then came the night everything shifted. Emily called me crying. Not softly. Not carefully. She was sobbing. She said Daniel had grabbed her during an argument and pushed her against a wall. She said it happened so fast she could not even remember what they were fighting about. Then she said the words that made my blood run cold. He told me, if I ever tell you about it, you will regret it. He said, you always meddle and one day it will cost you. I kept my voice calm. I told her I loved her. I told her she could come home anytime. She said she could not. She said he would get angrier. She said she just needed things to calm down. She said she was sorry. After that call, I sat in silence for a long time. That was no longer abuse hidden behind excuses. That was a direct threat tied to violence. Daniel had crossed a line and he knew it. I called Michael immediately and told him everything. He did not hesitate. He said he would help however I needed. For the first time in 3 years, I was not alone in this. We met the next day and went through the journal together. Page after page. Pattern after pattern. Michael saw what I had been seeing alone for years. He did not interrupt. When I finished, he leaned back and said, "This man is dangerous. He is planning something." We made a decision then. We would not confront Daniel yet. We would gather enough evidence that when we acted there would be no ambiguity. No room for manipulation. No chance for him to twist the story. That week I contacted an attorney I trusted. Someone who had worked with my wife and me years earlier. I did not give him every detail yet. I asked hypotheticals. What happens if a son-in-law threatens a father? What happens when there is documented abuse? What protections exist? His answers were careful but clear. Documentation matters. Timing matters. Safety comes first. Meanwhile, Daniel began circling closer. He showed up unannounced more often. He watched me more closely. He made comments about my age, about how stressful life can be for older men living alone. He joked about accidents. I smiled and wrote everything down later. The breaking point came when the storage unit was compromised. I received a call from the facility manager late one afternoon. His voice was tight, professional but concerned. He told me someone had tried to access my unit without authorization. The man claimed it belonged to his wife. He had tools. He was aggressive when confronted. Security footage was being reviewed. I did not need to ask who it was. That moment clarified everything. Daniel knew about the unit. He did not know what was inside, but he knew it mattered. And he was desperate enough to attempt a break-in. Desperation is the most dangerous phase because it strips away caution. I drove to the unit immediately. The lock was intact but scratched. Someone had tried to force it. I stood there staring at that small piece of metal, understanding that the quiet preparation phase was over. Daniel was actively trying to remove my leverage. That night I called the attorney again and told him everything. The abuse. The threats. The attempted break-in. He did not hesitate this time. He told me to file a restraining order immediately and to notify law enforcement. He said escalation like this does not reverse. It only accelerates. I filed the report the next morning. I brought copies of my journal. Photographs. Dates. Michael provided a statement. The officers listened carefully. They did not dismiss me. That mattered more than I expected. When Daniel was served the restraining order, his reaction was explosive. He called me screaming. He accused me of trying to destroy his marriage. He said Emily belonged with him. He said I would regret humiliating him. His voice was not controlled anymore. It was raw, furious, panicked. That call lasted less than a minute. I hung up and documented it immediately. Emily arrived at my house that evening shaking. She had packed quickly. She said Daniel had smashed a lamp and blamed her for forcing his hand. She said she was afraid to go back. I held her and told her she was safe. That night she slept in her childhood room with the door locked. I wish I could say that was the end. That the restraining order scared him off. That safety returned. But that is not how men like Daniel operate. 3 days later Michael called me from a parking lot. He whispered into the phone. He said Daniel was following him. He said he watched Daniel buy supplies from a hardware store. Rope. Plastic sheeting. Chemicals. Items you do not buy together unless you intend to harm someone and erase evidence. Michael recorded it discreetly. The footage was clear. Daniel moved with focus. Calm. Determined. Not angry. Resolved. That was when I understood the final truth. Daniel was no longer trying to scare me. He was planning to remove me. We went to the police that night with everything. The journal. The footage. The reports. The threats. They took it seriously. Surveillance was Seeing the truth in full daylight for the first time. That night after everything was quiet again, I sat alone and cried. Not from fear. From relief. From the release of 3 years of silence. But I also knew something else. The arrest was not the hardest part. The trial would not be the hardest part. The hardest part would be helping my daughter rebuild herself after years of controlled reality. And that was only just beginning. The days after Daniel's arrest moved strangely slow and fast at the same time. Slow in the way trauma stretches minutes into hours, and fast in the way life refuses to pause even when everything inside you has fractured. Emily barely spoke at first. She stayed in her old room with the door half closed, like she was unsure whether she was allowed to take up space again. Every sound made her tense. Every knock startled her. This was not weakness. This was the nervous system trying to relearn safety. I did not push her. I cooked meals and left them on the kitchen counter. I asked simple questions. Do you want tea or coffee? Do you want the window open? Control had been taken from her for so long that even small choices mattered. So I let her choose everything she could. Michael came by every evening. Not to talk about Daniel or the case or the future. He talked about ordinary things. The weather. Traffic. A movie he watched. He did not ask Emily questions. He did not demand explanations. He just sat in the same room quietly present. Consistency without pressure is something abuse survivors rarely get. Michael gave it without effort. 3 days later, Emily asked me about the storage unit. She stood in the doorway of my study and looked older than her 30 years. Her voice was steady but fragile. Dad, you always said you had things set up to protect me. What did you mean by that? I took a breath. This was the moment Laura had prepared me for. The moment when secrecy would become clarity. I told her about the unit. Not everything yet. Just that there were documents there. Things her mother and I had prepared years ago. Safeguards. Emily listened without interrupting. When I finished, she nodded once and said, I want to see it. Not today. But soon. The trial preparation began quickly. Charges were serious. The evidence was extensive. The journal mattered more than I ever imagined. 3 years of dates, times, patterns. It showed escalation. It showed intent. It showed planning. It showed that Daniel did not snap. He calculated. Emily met with an advocate assigned to her case. The advocate explained what testimony would involve. What questions might come. How Daniel's defense would attempt to rewrite reality. Emily nodded through it all. Afterward, she went upstairs and slept for 12 hours straight. One night about a week later, she came downstairs holding the leather journal. She asked if she could read it. I said yes, but reminded her she did not owe anyone strength. She could stop any time. She nodded and took it back to her room. Over the next few weeks she read all of it. Slowly. Sometimes she would come downstairs shaking. Sometimes angry. Sometimes numb. She would ask why I wrote certain things. Why I noticed certain details. Why I did not intervene sooner. I answered honestly every time. Because I was waiting for proof. Because he isolated you. Because if I had confronted him without evidence, you would have defended him harder. Because silence was the only way to stay close enough to protect you. There were moments she hated me for it. I accepted that. Anger is easier than grief. And grief was coming. The day we went to the storage unit together was quiet. We drove without music. Emily stared out the window the entire way. When I unlocked the door and slid it open, she froze. Inside looked exactly like it always had. To anyone else it was clutter. To me it was structure. Layers. Intentional disorganization. The outer layer was grief. Laura's coats. Her shoes. Boxes of books she loved. Photo albums from when Emily was little. Emily stepped forward and touched a sweater. She pressed it to her face and broke. She cried the way people cry when they realize something precious was never truly gone. I did not speak. I let her have that moment. When she was ready, I showed her the cabinet. Inside were the documents Laura insisted on years before she died. The trust. The policies. The legal language that turned love into protection. Emily read slowly. She realized something critical then. Daniel could never have accessed anything even if something had happened to me. Nothing was in my name alone. Nothing could pass through him. She sat on the floor holding the papers and whispered, "Mom knew." She knew. Yes, I said. She did. At the bottom of the cabinet was a sealed envelope in Laura's handwriting. Emily's name was written on it. My hands shook as I passed it to her. That letter had been waiting for this moment. Emily read it silently. Then again. Then aloud. Laura's words were gentle but firm. Love should never make you smaller. Control is not protection. A partner who asks you to give up yourself is not choosing you. They are consuming you. Emily folded the letter carefully and held it to her chest. In that moment something shifted. Understanding replaced confusion. Grief replaced denial. She finally allowed herself to see Daniel clearly without the fog of fear. The trial began 2 months later. Daniel sat at the defense table expressionless. He avoided Emily's eyes. When she testified, he stared straight ahead. His lawyer attempted to frame me as controlling. As secretive. As manipulative. They suggested Emily had been unstable. That Michael was obsessed. That the journal was exaggeration. The prosecutor dismantled that narrative page by page. Dates matched phone records. Bruises matched medical visits. Surveillance matched purchases. The attempted break-in matched security footage. Patterns do not lie. When the verdict came back guilty on all counts, Emily did not react at first. She sat still. Then she exhaled. Deep. Long. Like someone releasing air they had been holding for years. Daniel was sentenced to 15 years. Afterward, Emily said something that surprised me. She said, "I thought I would feel victory. I just feel quiet." I told her that quiet is peace returning. Slowly. Life after trauma is not dramatic. It is rebuilding routines. Trusting mornings. Learning to sleep without listening for footsteps. Emily started therapy. She learned the language of manipulation. She learned how control disguises itself as concern. She learned that love does not demand sacrifice of self. She grew stronger quietly. Not all at once. Not visibly. But steadily. Michael remained constant. Never pushing. Never claiming. Just present. One afternoon months later, Emily asked me if I thought it would be wrong to have dinner with Michael alone. Not as friends. Not as anything yet. Just to see how it felt. I smiled. I said, the most important thing is that you choose freely. Not out of fear. Not out of obligation. Only because you want to. She nodded. That night she came home smiling. A real smile. One that reached her eyes. A year later we returned to the storage unit one last time. Together we sorted through everything. The unit no longer needed to be a fortress. It became what it was meant to be. A place of memory, not fear. Emily kept the journal. She said it reminded her that someone had seen the truth even when she could not. Now when people ask me if I regret waiting so long, I tell them this. Silence is dangerous when it hides truth. But silence can also be preparation. The difference is intention. I waited not because I was afraid. I waited because I was watching. Preparing. Protecting. He did not reference the past unless Emily brought it up. He respected her pace. That respect alone was proof of who he was. 6 months after the sentencing, Emily asked me something I had not expected. She asked if she could move back into her own place. Not with Michael. Alone. She said she needed to know she could choose herself before choosing anyone else. That was the moment I knew she was truly healing. We found a small apartment not far from my house. Sunny. Quiet. Nothing dramatic. I helped her move. I hung curtains. I fixed a loose cabinet hinge. When I left that first night, I sat in my car for a long time before driving away. Letting go is another form of love. Emily began rebuilding her social life slowly. She reached out to old friends. Some responded warmly. Some had moved on. She learned to accept both without internalizing rejection. That was growth. She and Michael spent time together cautiously. Walks. Coffee. Long conversations without expectations. One evening she told me she felt something new. Calm. She said she did not feel watched or managed or evaluated. She felt seen. A year after the arrest, Emily and Michael officially became a couple. Quietly. No announcement. No urgency. Just a decision. That was how it should be. People sometimes ask me how I knew Daniel was dangerous so early. I tell them I did not know. I suspected. Knowing requires proof. But suspicion is what tells you to pay attention. To observe. To document. That leather journal changed everything. Not because it was dramatic. Because it was consistent. Patterns do not lie when written down honestly over time. Emily once asked me if it hurt to watch and not intervene sooner. I told her the truth. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. But stepping in without evidence would have pushed her deeper into his control. Sometimes protection looks like waiting in the dark with a light ready. The storage unit is gone now. We cleared it out together. The documents remain, but the secrecy does not. Emily knows everything now. She understands why her mother insisted on protection. She understands why I stayed silent. Understanding does not erase pain, but it transforms it. Laura's letter stays with Emily. She reads it when doubt creeps in. When old conditioning whispers that love requires sacrifice. That letter reminds her that love should expand you, not shrink you. As for me, I have learned something difficult. Being a parent does not mean saving your child from all harm. It means staying close enough that when harm reveals itself you can act decisively. Quietly. Effectively. I do not regret my choices. I regret the reality that made them necessary. But regret does not change the past. Preparation does. If there is one thing I want anyone listening to understand, it is this. Abuse is rarely loud at the beginning. It starts with charm. With concern. With questions framed as care. By the time violence appears, the groundwork has already been laid. Pay attention to patterns. Believe documentation. Trust discomfort. And never underestimate the power of quiet preparation. That storage unit was never about money. It was about time. Time to wait. Time to gather truth. Time to act when it mattered. And when it did matter, we were ready. After Emily moved into her own place, something unexpected happened. I started to notice how quiet my house had become. Not the heavy quiet of fear or waiting, but the open quiet of something completed. For years every decision I made revolved around watching, protecting, preparing. Now that constant vigilance was no longer necessary, and it left a strange absence behind. I began walking more often. Early mornings mostly. The neighborhood looked different when I was not scanning for threats. I noticed gardens again. Dogs barking behind fences. People waving as they passed. Ordinary life returned slowly the way circulation returns after a limb has gone numb. Emily called often. Sometimes just to tell me about something small she cooked or a book she was reading. Those calls mattered more than the dramatic ones ever did. They were proof of safety. Michael remained part of our lives in a way that felt natural. He never tried to replace me. He never positioned himself as the hero. He understood that healing is not a competition. It is a process. One evening Emily came over for dinner and asked if I would tell her more about her mother. Not about the illness. About who she was before. That question opened a door I had not walked through in years. I told her about Laura's stubborn kindness. About how she planned everything 3 steps ahead. About how she trusted preparation more than optimism. Emily listened closely. Then she said something that stayed with me. Mom saved me twice, didn't she? Once when she was alive and once after she was gone. Yes, I said. She did. That was when Emily finally understood that the trust and the documents were not about money. They were about autonomy. About making sure no one could ever trap her financially the way Daniel had tried to trap her emotionally. Months passed. The legal aftermath settled. Appeals were denied. Daniel disappeared into the system where he could no longer reach her. The quiet remained. One afternoon Emily asked me if I would speak publicly about what happened. Not in detail. Not names. Just the patterns. The warning signs. The importance of documentation. I hesitated. I had always been private. But then I thought about how many people miss the signs because they look harmless alone. I agreed. I spoke at a small community event. I told the story without drama. Without revenge. I talked about charm. About isolation. About how concern can be used as control. About how waiting is not inaction when it is purposeful. Afterwards several people approached me quietly. They did not want attention. They wanted confirmation. They said they saw similar patterns. They said they were unsure. I told them to write things down. To trust patterns. To seek help early. Emily stood in the back listening. On the drive home she said, I am glad you waited until now to tell this. I would not have been able to hear it before. That was the final confirmation that timing matters as much as truth. A year after the trial Emily and Michael moved in together. Not rushed. Not dramatic. Just another decision made from clarity, not fear. Their home felt light. Laughter came easily. Silence was comfortable, not tense. Sometimes Emily still has moments. Certain sounds. Certain phrases. Trauma does not disappear. But it loosens its grip when it is understood. When it is named. She keeps the journal in a drawer. She does not read it often now. But she knows it is there. Evidence that she was never imagining things. Proof that someone saw her reality even when she could not. As for me, I finally cleaned out my study. I no longer needed to keep copies of everything within reach. I no longer needed to plan for worst-case scenarios. Letting go was another phase of healing. If I could speak to my younger self at the beginning of all this, I would tell him this. You are not weak for waiting. You are not cruel for staying silent. But silence must always serve truth, not fear. The world often misunderstands protection. They think it is loud. Confrontational. Immediate. Sometimes it is. But sometimes protection is patience sharpened into readiness. That storage unit was never meant to be opened in panic. It was meant to be opened with clarity. And when it finally was, it did exactly what it was built to do. Emily is safe. She is whole. She is choosing her life freely. That is the only outcome that ever mattered. Time has a way of testing whether healing is real or just temporary relief. The months after Emily moved in with Michael were that test. There were no dramatic setbacks. No sudden collapses. Instead there were entries where I could hear my own restraint. Pages where I wanted to reach back through time and shake myself. But there was also clarity. I saw the logic. The consistency. The discipline required to wait when acting too soon would have caused more harm. That understanding brought me peace. Emily asked me one afternoon if I ever feared I would be too late. That Daniel would act before I could stop him. I told her the truth. Every day. But fear does not determine action. Preparation does. The storage unit had been a physical reminder of that philosophy. It was not about hiding. It was about readiness. When people hear stories like ours, they often want villains and heroes clearly defined. They want dramatic confrontations. They want revenge. What they do not want is patience. Because patience is uncomfortable. It asks you to sit with uncertainty. To trust process over impulse. But patience saved my daughter. Emily eventually decided to pursue something new. Not a job change or a big move. She started volunteering with an organization that supported people leaving controlling relationships. She did not share her story publicly. She listened. She believed. She offered presence. That was enough. One evening she told me she finally understood why I never spoke badly about Daniel to her before everything came out. She said, if you had attacked him verbally, I would have defended him. You waited until I could see him clearly on my own. That realization mattered more than any apology. Michael and I talked less about the past as time went on. Not because it was forgotten, but because it no longer defined the present. We shared meals. We fixed things around the house. We watched games on television. Normal life resumed. Occasionally someone would bring up the case. News articles. Court records. Speculation. Emily chose not to engage. She said attention felt like another form of control. She preferred privacy. That choice was hers and it was respected. I learned something important watching her reclaim agency. Healing is not about erasing history. It is about repositioning it. What once controlled you becomes context, not identity. 2 years after the arrest, Emily and Michael got engaged. Quietly. No elaborate announcement. They told me over dinner. Emily looked at me carefully, waiting for something. Approval. Concern. Advice. I smiled and told her the only thing that mattered was that she felt free inside the decision. She nodded. She said that was how she knew it was right. They married a year later in a small ceremony near the coast. Nothing extravagant. Friends. Family. Laughter. When Emily walked toward Michael, I felt none of the dread I had felt years earlier. Only calm. Only trust. I thought about Laura then. About how much she would have loved that day. About how her preparation had echoed forward in time, protecting our daughter even after she was gone. After the wedding, Emily hugged me and whispered, "Thank you for waiting." That was all she said. It was enough. Now when I think back on everything, I understand something fundamental. Protection is not about controlling outcomes. It is about preserving choice. I did not choose for Emily. I protected her ability to choose for herself. That storage unit is empty now. The documents are secure elsewhere. The journal sits on a shelf in Emily's home. Not hidden. Not feared. Just acknowledged. If there is a lesson here, it is this. When something feels wrong, do not rush to be heard. Rush to be prepared. Observe. Document. Seek help. Build support. And when the moment comes, act without hesitation. I waited 3 years. Not because I was unsure. But because timing is everything. And when the time came, I did not hesitate at all. As time moved forward, I began to understand that what happened to our family was not rare. The details were specific but the pattern was universal. Control rarely announces itself as control. It introduces itself as care. As concern. As protection. And that is why it is so dangerous. Emily once asked me how Daniel managed to change her so completely without her noticing. I told her the truth. He did not change you all at once. He adjusted the edges. He questioned one relationship. Then another. He reframed one disagreement. Then another. Until the ground beneath you shifted so gradually that you never felt the moment it moved. That is how manipulation works. It does not feel like force. It feels like adaptation. I began reading more about psychological abuse after everything was over. Not out of obsession but out of understanding. I wanted language for what I had witnessed. The literature confirmed what my journal already showed. Isolation first. Financial dependence next. Reality distortion after that. And when those fail, escalation. People often think physical violence is the beginning. It is almost always the end stage. Emily now recognizes those patterns immediately. She says it feels like learning a new language after being deaf to it for years. Once you hear it, you cannot unhear it. There were moments when she grieved not just the relationship but the version of herself she lost. The confident woman who laughed easily. The friend who trusted without fear. Grief like that does not follow a timeline. It comes in waves. Some days she felt strong. Other days hollow. I stayed available without hovering. That balance is difficult. Parents want to fix pain. But some pain must be walked through, not removed. I learned to trust Emily's resilience. One afternoon she told me something that surprised me. She said, "I used to think your silence meant you did not see me. Now I understand it meant you were watching everything." That reframing healed something between us that words never could. Michael and I talked about fatherhood one evening while working on a broken fence. He said something I will never forget. He said loving someone does not mean standing between them and pain. It means standing beside them while they face it. That sentence captured everything I had been trying to do for 3 years. I no longer fear silence the way I once did. Silence can be abandonment or it can be vigilance. The difference lies in intention and preparation. The hardest truth I have learned is this. You cannot rescue someone until they are ready to be rescued. But you can prepare the ground so that when they are ready there is somewhere safe to land. Emily landed. She built a life that does not revolve around fear. She makes choices without asking permission. She rests without guilt. She loves without shrinking. Those things may seem small. They are everything. When people ask me now what the storage unit really was, I tell them this. It was not a hiding place. It was a promise. A promise that when the truth needed to be seen it would be undeniable. And that promise was kept. There is a moment that comes after trauma when the danger is gone but the meaning has not yet arrived. That space is uncomfortable. Too quiet. Too open. It is where people either rush to forget or slowly learn. Emily chose to learn. She asked questions most people avoid. Why did this happen to me? Why did I ignore my instincts? Why did love feel like fear for so long? Therapy did not give her simple answers. It gave her better questions. And over time those questions reshaped how she saw herself. She stopped asking what was wrong with her and started asking what had been done to her. That shift mattered more than any verdict. I watched her begin to trust her body again. To notice tension and respond to it instead of pushing through. To say no without explanation. To say yes without apology. These were not dramatic changes. They were quiet revolutions. One evening she told me something that brought everything full circle. She said, "When I was with Daniel I thought love meant endurance. I thought staying proved commitment. Now I understand love means safety. If I am not safe, I am not loved. That sentence alone was worth every year of waiting. As survival itself is not a debt that must be repaid. Michael and Emily built their life slowly. They argued sometimes. But arguments were not threats. They did not escalate. They did not leave bruises. They did not require fear to resolve. That difference was everything. On the anniversary of Daniel's arrest, Emily asked if we could do something symbolic. She wanted to close that chapter intentionally. We went back to the harbor where the storage unit once stood. The building had been renovated. New paint. New tenants. The past erased visually but not emotionally. Emily brought the journal with her. She did not open it. She did not reread it. She simply held it for a moment and then handed it back to me. She said, "You carried this long enough. I do not need it anymore." I understood what she meant. The journal had served its purpose. It was evidence once. Then understanding. Now it was memory. And memory no longer needed to live in ink. We drove home in silence that felt complete. That night I realized something else. The story was no longer mine to tell. It belonged to Emily now. To her choices. To her future. My role had shifted from protector to witness. And that is how it should be. 1 year after everything ended, I sat alone in my living room and thought about how close I came to losing my daughter without ever losing her physically. That is the kind of loss people do not talk about enough. The slow disappearance of someone you love while they are still breathing. The way manipulation erases a person piece by piece until even they do not recognize themselves. Emily is sitting across from me as I tell this story now. She is reading on the couch, legs tucked under her the way she used to when she was a teenager. The difference is that there is no tension in her shoulders anymore. No quiet vigilance. She exists fully in the room. That is the real ending. People sometimes ask if I would do anything differently if I could go back. They expect me to say I would speak sooner. Act faster. Confront harder. But the truth is more complicated. I would still watch. I would still document. I would still prepare. Because acting without evidence would not have saved her. It would have isolated her further. What I would change is not my actions but my understanding. I would trust my instincts earlier. Not to accuse but to observe with intention. I would name discomfort instead of dismissing it. I would seek counsel sooner. Preparation does not have to be lonely. If you are listening to this and something in it feels familiar, pay attention to that feeling. Familiarity is not coincidence. Patterns repeat because they work. That does not mean they are acceptable. It means they must be interrupted deliberately. If you are watching someone you love become smaller, quieter, more apologetic, more isolated, do not ignore it. Write things down. Dates. Moments. Changes. Patterns matter. They tell a story even when people are too afraid to speak. If you are the one being controlled, hear this clearly. Love does not require fear. Love does not punish independence. Love does not isolate you from the people who knew you before. If someone makes you feel confused about your own reality, that is not connection. That is control. You do not need perfect proof to ask for help. You only need enough courage to question what feels wrong. There are people trained to listen. There are resources available. You are not weak for needing them. I was fortunate. I had time. I had support. I had documentation. Not everyone has those things. But everyone deserves safety. This story is not about revenge. It is not about a father defeating a villain. It is about patience. About preparation. About loving someone enough to wait for the moment when truth can finally land without pushing them further into harm. The storage unit downtown is gone now. Renovated. Repurposed. Forgotten by everyone except me. But what it represented remains. quiet readiness. The willingness to prepare for a storm you hope never comes. Inside that unit were documents and evidence, yes. But the real thing stored there was time. Time to watch. Time to understand. Time to act decisively when acting mattered. Emily once told me that the hardest part of healing was forgiving herself for not seeing what was happening sooner. I told her what I will tell you now. Manipulation works because it is designed to. Falling for it is not failure. Staying trapped forever is the danger. She is not trapped anymore. If you take nothing else from this story, take this. Silence is not always neglect. Sometimes it is strategy. But strategy without intention is just avoidance. Know the difference. I waited because I was preparing. I stayed quiet because I was watching. And when the moment came, I did not hesitate. My daughter is safe. She is whole. She is living a life built on choice, not fear. That is the only ending that matters. Thank you for listening. And please take care of yourselves.